Americans now owe $1.34 trillion in student debt, an amount that's second only to mortgages.
Please make sure your college years are the best ones of your life, because thanks to the debt that we are saddling you with, they almost certainly will be.
But how did we get here? Surprisingly, the history of student loans stretches a lot longer than what you might think. The first documented system of student loans began in the Middle Ages. Students that couldn't afford to pay tuition would lock certain valuable items, like a Bible or books, in a chest. That system worked actually pretty well for about 300 years until the printing press came along, at which point the value of books decreased. In the 1600s, elites largely funded poor college students with no expectation of ever being paid back. It wasn't until 1838 that Harvard created its own lending agency that offered zero-interest student loans to students that couldn't afford tuition. Later, that system expanded to other Ivy League schools. It was the GI Bill in the wake of World War II that paved the way for government involvement in paying for college. The bill gave funding to veterans, and it doubled higher education enrollment over the next decade.
From the President's office in the White House.
My fellow citizens, my subject tonight is science in national security.
In the 50s, the government started providing loans to students in fields that were critical for the nation's defense. But the tipping point was really in 1965.
We have the power to shape the civilization that we want.
President Johnson signed the Higher Education Act, and that made student loans available to everyone, regardless of field of study. By the time the 90s rolled around, student loans started having a snowball effect. That was thanks to Congress that made the student loan program available to everyone, regardless of need. Throw in the fact that since the 1970s, the cost of college adjusted for inflation has grown by 300%, and you have an enormous problem.
No. You are on beans and rice and beans. No vacation. You will not see the light of day. You will work like an animal.
In the 5 years between 2005 and 2010, college enrollment grew by 20%. That was the biggest growth since the 1970s. And by April 2012, student debt surpassed $1 trillion for the first time in history. And students now linger in debt for years or even decades, with each of them borrowing on average $37,000. So policymakers and educators are looking for better options.
We should not be punishing people for getting an education. We should encourage people to get an education.
But while we're waiting for a solution, the number keeps climbing. In fact, student debt grows by $2,726 per second. So in the time that you watch this video, we accumulated over $300,000 in additional student debt. So while we're waiting for Congress to figure this out, time is money. In this case, literally.